So the title of this lesson is called Fixing Safari Bugs, and whilst one of them is a Safari bug, the other one is a more generic bug that we have in our application. And let's go and fix these before we deploy and publish our application. And what we want to do is, I'm logged into Safari, and I'm logged in as Bob, and let's go to one of the events that Bob is hosting, and Future Activity 4 is one of them. And if I click on View and I try and manage the events and I just make any kind of change, what I'll find is that I've got a problem submitting the data. And if I go and inspect the elements, and let's just go to the console and the network in this case and find the bad request, and I don't use this very often, so let's just submit that request again so that we can get the details of the error. And what we get here is the date as the issue, and it says the date must not be empty. And the reason we're getting this in Safari is that it doesn't deal with combining the date and time the way that we've done it in our application. It's very fussy on how we create the date from a date string. So what we'll need to do, and just to prove the point actually, I'm just going to go into Chrome. And let me just go back to the activities as a whole, and I'm going to go back into Chrome, and I'll pick on the same activity, I'll click in View, manage the event, and I'll make the same change, click Submit. In Chrome it's no problem, and in Safari I'll just refresh the page, and go back to the hosting, and click on View. Safari does have a problem with how we're dealing with dates inside here. When it comes to single digits, it simply doesn't deal with it. And also it doesn't like the empty string in between the date and the time, which is how we've got it in our current configuration. So let's change our combined date and time to make it work with both Chrome and Safari. And dates can always be an issue in an application. They're always something to be wary of. And let's take a look at what we're doing right now. So currently we're getting a time string which is made up of the time plus the minutes plus 00, and then we're doing the same thing but we're going about getting the date and time with the full year, get month and get dates. So in order to correct this, let's make some changes, and I'm just going to comment out what we've got up here. And what we'll do instead is we'll get the date string from the date.toISO string, and then we'll split the date on the t, and we'll get the first parameter in this case from our split array because the date is going to be first, and then we'll get the time string, and we'll set this equal to time.toISO string, and split once again based on t, and this time we'll get the second part of the array. And then what we can do is specify a t when we combine our new date and time, and this will just be an ISO string now of our date and our time, and this should work with Safari as well as Chrome. So let's go and test this, and I'll just refresh the page and make another change just to the title, nothing else, and click Submit, and now this is functional. And if I go back and manage the event and change the time to something else and the date to something else and click Submit, then this is successful. And let's go and make sure we haven't changed anything in Chrome, and I'll just refresh this, click on Manage the Events and change the time and click Submit, and now we've got success in Chrome as well. So that's one bug resolved. And there's another bug which is kind of hard to see unless you're doing some very specific actions. And if I click on Manage Events and cancel and then Manage Event again, this time we see the bug in this case. And what we're getting here is a MobX type error. And it says, since strict mode is enabled, changing observed observable values outside actions is not allowed. Now what are we doing here to change an observable? Well, when we're constructing our activity form values, we're setting the time to the dates we're getting back from the server so that we've got the values in our form. But why do we only see it sometimes? Why don't we see it every time? And if I go back to the activities, and I'll just go back to ones that I'm hosting, and click on View and Manage Event, I don't see it here. But if I cancel, and then I manage the event, I see it every time. And if we go back to VS Code and take a look at our activity form, and specifically this load activity, which is where we're getting this particular issue, and I'll head back into VS Code, and let's open up both the activity store and the activity form. And what we're doing in here is when we open the form, we're inside our use effect here, we're loading the activity. And what we're doing here in our load activity is we're actually returning the activity so that we can populate our form values when we initialize the form. Now if we go to the activity store and we take a look at the load activity method, and I'll just scroll down to find this, we've got two options here, because if first of all we're trying to get this from cache, and if we have it available in cache, then we're returning this activity. And if we don't have it in cache, then we're getting the activity from our API and we're returning this activity. And what's the difference between these two? Well, one of these is an observable and the other one is a simple JavaScript object. And the one we're getting and returning from our API is a JavaScript object. That's why we don't see the problem. But in our load activity, the first option, if we are getting it from cache, then we're getting this from our activity registry. And this activity here is going to be an observable. And what we're doing then is we're taking this observable inside our activity form and we're creating our new activity form values from this. And if we go to this definition, then what we're doing is we're initializing this activity values and we're setting the time inside here. But because this is still an observable at this stage, that's why we're receiving the problem. Now we don't want this to be an observable. We want this to just be a JavaScript object when we send it back. And what we'll do to achieve this, there's a method inside mobx we can use to turn an observable into a plain JavaScript object, and it's called to.js. So what we'll do is we'll use this method, we'll say to.js, and we'll auto import from mobx. And this is basically a deep clone of this particular object. So if we use this, and let's bring it in, and then we wrap our activity around this, we're no longer sending back an observable to our activity form. Now it's only our activity form that we're returning the activity to directly, and we're doing something with it. Whenever else we load an activity, we're simply setting it to list.activity. And then, for example, in our activity details, we do want that to be an observable. We're not actually making use of what we return inside our activity details. So what this should do is resolve this particular problem. And if I go back to the browser, and I'll just go back to Chrome in this case and click cancel, I'll just refresh and try and replicate the problem that we saw. And if I click on manage event, cancel, manage event, cancel, now it's fully functional because we're no longer trying to manipulate an observable as we populate the form values inside here. And we shouldn't have a problem with any of our activities, and we should still be able to cancel attendance and join activity and see the changes live, because what we're loading in our activity details is the observable. So now we've dealt with the bugs, we can move along.